So we're in week 5 now, and by now you should have submitted the interpret sections on the 19th. And really, there's just 3 assignments left. One is the systemic change proposal, one is the final PowerPoint presentation, and the last assignment is the final essay. So I'm going to explain what each of those assignments entails. So in the ePortfolio, I'm under Decide Responsibly. As with the other sections, there's an overview that is good to read. But the assignment for this section is the systemic change proposal. This is background information for your presentation, and there are 3 major questions that I'm asking you to address. The first one is to identify an audience to whom your presentation is directed and explain why they are your audience. Make sure you are as specific as possible. So if you intend to present to people in general, your presentation is not going to be on target most likely. But if you are focused on a target group, this will help you understand what the information is you need to convey and how to convey it. So this audience question is critical. Now you can be very specific. This could be a particular person, it could be a group of people, it could be your peers, any audience that you intend to persuade to do something. And keep in mind that if you have the CEO of a large corporation in mind, that is a very difficult presentation. One, because it's difficult to get on their schedule, so the likelihood of implementation is pretty low. And secondly, this is a whole different way of looking at the organization. There's a whole knowledge and skill set that you may not yet understand. So as you think of your intervention point, try to keep it to something that you can do, because the goal of this is to actually implement it. So enough about audience. The second one is to describe the intervention point. So we had you map the systems, analyze all of the sectors and a particular organization, but somehow you need to figure out how your solution intervenes in an existing system. And you may want to review Dana Meadows' work on places to intervene in a system to kind of clarify what it is you intend to do. So these responses don't need to be exhaustive, but they need to be a few paragraphs to give me a sense of what it is you're trying to do in your presentation. And the last one is, what is the action point? So what specifically are you asking your target audience to do? Think of just very basic verbs here. Would you like them to consume differently, donate, vote, whatever the action is? Just keep in mind that the request needs to be specific. So that's enough for the systemic change proposal. Now, under the Act Courageously tab here, there's also an overview, but you'll notice 2 assignments here. One is the systemic change presentation. Now, because this is an online course, we won't actually be able to give your presentation. But I do want you to create a PowerPoint as if you were going to give this presentation. And you actually may well want to go do this. If it's an organization you're involved in, or you have a pretty clear action point that you're passionate about, by all means create something that you can go out and use. The presentation should be about 10 slides, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, somewhere in that range, up to 10 minutes. And the task in this one is to convey something that's very complicated in terms that are very straightforward and accessible to an audience that may not know anything about it, or may know something or a lot about it. But again, you determine that by choosing your audience. I've recommended, there's tons of articles out here on making effective PowerPoints. This is just one, 10 tips for effective PowerPoint presentations. Keep these points in mind, because I'm going to look pretty carefully at your PowerPoint, even though you're not delivering it. I can tell by looking at your slides whether you followed some of these things. If you have, as I said before, 8-point font and 250 words on a single slide, that really isn't a presentation. So choose images and maps, include some data, maybe some keywords or key phrases, something to give your audience a sense of what your core challenge is and what your solution is, so that they walk away from this presentation with a clear idea of action steps. And the third and final assignment is the final reflection essay. And this is where you're going to reflect on the process, on your learning. So there's 5 questions here. The first one is go back and look over your baseline reflection again. And if you kept a blog or a journal or something along the way, identify a few assumptions that you held previously that you later found to be inaccurate, incomplete, or poorly articulated. So this is, in your own thinking, have you identified something where you are off base? Have you changed your mind because of evidence? So be sure to include evidence from this. So in other words, quote yourself from the baseline reflection and analyze maybe the language you used wasn't very sharp, or maybe the perspective you were taking was too broad, whatever the case. But this is what we call learning. So I'm looking at evidence of learning. Since pragmatic inquiry, as you can see from this symbol, this image, is an ongoing and iterative process. So along the way, you probably identified another challenge question that you could then explore and go through the same process. What is that new challenge question? Or maybe there's a few of them. What new ideas are you developing for your action plan? So this is an ongoing process, and it's important to identify that in this Begin Again section. The third one is a list of action steps for you. What's next? What will you do now? What investments will you make? How will you involve others? Will your actions be sustainable, both financially, in terms of energy, in all senses? Will your actions be sustainable? And how are you going to know if you're successful? So the idea in this next steps question is to convey the message that we are not just sitting in an ivory tower thinking about things, that we intend to go out and do stuff, to do something about the core challenge that you identified. You may find, having done all of this research, that you don't really care all that much about it. That's okay, but eventually you'll find something that you do care passionately about. The fourth question asks you to identify what the values are that are driving your inquiry and systemic change project. So your values may not have changed, or probably didn't change, but hopefully you have a broader conceptual framework to articulate those values, and sharper terms and concepts and categories and language to articulate those values. So that's what we're asking in this fourth question. Lastly, we're asking you to reflect on the specific ways that this method of pragmatic inquiry contributed to your learning. So maybe this helped change your mind, or clarify something, or maybe you got overwhelmed and confused by taking all of these different perspectives. Whatever the case, we're asking you to articulate how pragmatic inquiry contributed to your learning. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions about any of these assignments.